This week's blog post is the third in my series on the Clark Art Institute. For more on the Clark Art Institute, which is in Williamstown, Massachusetts, see the first post in this series. This week we are looking at paintings of the mid-18th century, a fascinating transitional period. This is from 1756. It is by Francois Boucher, Vulcan presenting arms to Venus for Aeneas. Francois Boucher, 1703 to 1770, painted at Versailles for Louis XV's queen and for his mistress, and was the principal designer for the Royal Porcelain Factories and the Gobelin Tapestry Factory. This painting, a sketch for a tapestry, shows Venus, who has seduced Vulcan into forging weapons for Aeneas, her son by a Trojan prince. Vulcan offers Venus a sword, and the putty at his feet romp around with a fancy plumed helmet. Shield and armor rest to the right side. Boucher was a leading French artist of the Rococo style. Because of its energy and exuberance, the Rococo is sometimes considered a late phase of the Baroque. Instead of religion, Rococo artists focus on love, gaiety, and elegance, often using allegorical, mythological, or pastoral subjects. Next up, this one is circa 1760. Jean-Baptiste Greuze, Study of a Young Man. The naturalism of Greuze, 1725 to 1805, was an alternative to the elegant decorative Rococo style. That Boucher painting we just saw was done only a few years before this one. This painting is an exercise in showing character and emotion, but Greuze usually painted genre scenes that tell a story, such as the father's curse on the lower left. Greuze's works fell out of popularity long before his death, as the neoclassical style came into vogue. Next up, circa 1768, so maybe 8 years after the last one. Yet another thread in the artistic mix of the 1760s is this Gainsborough portrait. I found myself returning to this painting several times while I was at the Clark, fascinated by those wonderfully alive eyes and the affection between these two figures. It's easy to see why Gainsborough was a leading portraitist of his time. The sister and brother in this portrait came from a family of musicians in Bath. The boy was a precocious violinist, the young woman an acclaimed soprano. 2 years after Gainsborough painted this, Elizabeth, 1754 to 1792, broke an engagement to an elderly suitor and eloped to France with playwright Richard Brinsley Sheridan, author of The School for Scandal, appropriately. These two had a tempestuous relationship until her death at age 38 of tuberculosis. And finally, for this week, this is circa 1770, so maybe 2 years after that portrait. This is Fragonard the Warrior, circa 1770. This is a work by another great Rococo painter, Fragonard, 1732 to 1806. The only Fragonard that ever stuck in my mind is Young Girl Reading at the lower right, which is circa 1776. The fantasy portrait that the Clark has is done in the same colors and has the same bold brushstrokes, but has a very different mood. Fragonard is the third and final great French artist of the Rococo style, following Watteau and Boucher. In part because his work is closely associated with the royal family, and in part because many of his patrons were exiled or guillotined, Fragonard gained few commissions after the French Revolution in 1789, but his brushstrokes were influential on the Impressionists, especially Renoir. Next week, we will see some more paintings from the Clark. DianeDuranteWriter.com has hundreds of posts on sculpture, architecture, and my other obsessions. To join the Sunday Recommendations email list, visit my website or email me. And you can say, "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on DianeDuranteWriter.com. As always, thank you for listening.